Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a massive, frankly, kind of an uncomfortable gap in modern business. It's that glaring contrast between those thick, dusty 5-year planning binders just sitting on corporate shelves and the sleek, real-time dashboards that actually drive today's markets. We've all seen those binders, right? They take months to put together, they look incredibly impressive, and, well, they're almost immediately out of date. So today, we're exploring a radically different approach, working backwards from the future.
To really grasp why this shift is absolutely crucial, we need to name the problem directly. And it's a stark one. Look, if you get senior managers from NSE boards into a room, shut the door, and ask for total honesty, they'll privately admit a really hard truth. They'll tell you, completely deadpan, that things actually go according to plan maybe 5 to 10% of the time. Just think about that for a second. 5 to 10%. That means the vast, overwhelming majority of what actually happens in the real world was completely unaccounted for in that official, polished plan. And that brings us to a core dilemma, perfectly hit on the head here by Roger Martin. A plan is not a strategy. A strategy is not a plan. It really forces us to ask the obvious question that this whole analysis builds toward. If the plan is wrong 90 to 95% of the time, why on earth are organizations still building detailed 5-year versions of it, slapping a shiny cover on it and calling it a strategy? It's a massive disconnect.
All right, so let's break down the alternative into 3 key ideas. First up, vision versus the plan.
You see, traditional planning often operates like we literally have a crystal ball. We fall prey to this really seductive belief in absolute certainty, treating strategy like it's a locked-in architectural blueprint, where our only job is to aggressively defend that fixed plan. But the world's most agile market leaders, they completely bypass that. They assume uncertainty. They know for a fact that markets will shift and competitors will pull surprises. So instead, they treat strategy like an artist's unfinished canvas. It's a living, breathing document where forecasting is all about testing assumptions, not rigidly defending an outdated blueprint.
So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, companies like Google and Tesla simply do not run on traditional 5-year plans. Instead, they rely on massive 10 to 30-year visions. Think about Google wanting to organize the world's information, or Tesla aiming to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. These horizons act as a fixed, unmoving North Star. And here's the absolute key takeaway. The North Star does not move, but the path to it, that path adjusts continuously. They combine that unwavering long-term direction with incredibly short planning cycles and constant experimentation.
That leads us directly into our second big idea, working backwards from tomorrow.
Rather than sitting around blindly asking, hey, what should we do over the next 5 years? And basically just guessing at the future, this approach flips the timeline completely in reverse. You start at the achieved vision. From that future point, you ask a very specific question. If we achieve this vision, what must be true? Jeff Bezos famously built Amazon's entire operational culture around this exact working backwards philosophy. You figure out the required milestones to make that future state true, and that dictates your actions today. It is literally the exact opposite of hope for the best planning.
And our third idea, strategy as a portfolio. We've got to stop viewing strategy as a single static document and start treating it as a dynamic portfolio of bets. Think of innovation like a 3-lane highway, with traffic moving at entirely different speeds. Market leaders are continually allocating resources across different time horizons. A common way to slice it is putting 70% into the core business, 20% to emerging businesses, and 10% to radical far-out bets. You monitor this portfolio constantly. If a bet isn't working out, you revise your approach, or you just cut it. No sentimentality, just following the evidence.
And to actually manage all these bets without getting bogged down, detailed activity plans are swapped out for OKRs, objectives, and key results. The objective is your what. So for instance, build Africa's best portfolio assistant. Then the key results are the how. These are clear, ambitious, measurable outcomes like tracking adoption rates, latency, or customer satisfaction. Instead of trying to predict every single little activity years in advance, OKRs empower your teams to test, learn, and adapt their way to success day by day.
Now, all of this execution is governed by a rhythm of continuous sensing. Sure, you might still have annual themes for governance, but the nitty-gritty operational strategy, that is revisited constantly. We're talking quarterly priorities, monthly reviews, weekly management meetings, all the way down to daily performance dashboards. It's an incredibly adaptive system designed to pivot the very second that data, customer behavior, or new technologies signal a shift.
All right, I want you to pay really close attention here because this is where the rubber actually meets the road. Ultimately, your strategy is not what you wrote down in that fancy binder. Your real strategy is revealed precisely by where you invest your people, your time, and your capital. Think about it, where the best talent goes, which markets actually receive investment, which initiatives get quietly cut, those decisions are the strategy. Resource allocation reveals your real strategy far more accurately than any planning document ever could.
And you don't just have to take my word for it. The absolute greatest business minds entirely agree on this shift. You have Clayton Christensen emphasizing that we need to prepare for future disruption. Steve Blank tells us to treat strategy as a series of hypotheses validated through actual customer discovery. And Eric Ries pushes us to execute small, measurable experiments. Strategy simply has to evolve based on hard evidence and customer learning, rather than being locked away and forgotten.
This brings us to a really critical realization, especially if you're operating in rapidly evolving environments. Look, in incredibly fast-moving markets like Kenya and East Africa, producing these static, hope-for-the-best plans is simply no longer viable. You literally cannot afford to just deliver a document every 5 years. You need a continuous sensing system, a tight cycle of experimentation, rapid learning, and smart, downright ruthless resource allocation.
So I'm going to close this out with a direct invitation and a question for you to ponder. If your organization is still producing static 5-year plans in a market that moves way faster than the ink dries, and if the gap between that polished document and your actual Monday morning reality is wider than it should be, well, that is a productive discomfort you shouldn't ignore. That is exactly the conversation worth having today. If you're ready to explore what this alternative actually looks like in practice, go visit www.acatalyst.co. Just ask yourself, are you managing a plan or are you actually executing a strategy?